If you're serious about military history and survival knowledge, subscribe to this channel now, because what we're covering today is the kind of forgotten fieldcraft that never makes it into modern gear reviews. This is not nostalgia, and it's not romance. This is about how World War II soldiers stayed alive in brutal cold without modern sleeping bags, high-loft synthetics, or battery-powered heating. For the next minute, stay with me, because once you understand this system, you'll never look at cold weather sleep the same way again. The armies that crossed frozen forests, mountains and steppe didn't defeat winter with equipment alone. They defeated it with layered systems, discipline, and a deep understanding of how the human body loses heat when it stops moving. This is about why sleeping bags were often secondary or completely absent in World War II frontline conditions. It's about why soldiers trusted ground insulation, vapor control, and clothing management more than bulky bedding, and how that knowledge still outperforms modern shortcuts when things go wrong. So, why did World War II armies treat the ground as the real enemy, not the air? Well, let me explain. It turns out the real threat to a soldier's life wasn't always what came from above, but what lay beneath their feet. You know, cold doesn't actually kill you from above. It kills you from below. World War II soldiers learned pretty quickly that frozen ground strips away heat much faster than cold air ever could. In tough campaigns like the Battle of the Bulge and the brutal winter fighting around Stalingrad on the Eastern Front, troops discovered that lying directly on the earth, snow, or even rock was basically a death sentence, no matter how many blankets they piled on. The solution, surprisingly, wasn't just a sleeping bag. It was all about insulation under the body. Soldiers would use pine boughs, straw, packed leaves, shelter halves folded into layers, or even spare uniforms laid flat to make a thermal barrier. The rule was simple and, honestly, strictly enforced. Never let your body touch the ground. If you can insulate beneath you, you can survive with far less insulation above you. How layered clothing replaced sleeping bags entirely. World War II doctrine emphasized sleeping in the same clothing used for movement, but managed correctly. Soldiers did not crawl into a bag and seal moisture inside. Instead, they loosened layers, vented sweat, and dried socks before rest. Wool was king because it retained warmth when damp. Greatcoats were used as quilts rather than worn tightly, allowing trapped air to do the work. The trick was not compression. Tight insulation fails. Loose layers create dead air space, and dead air is what keeps you alive. This is why many units slept wrapped in coats, shelter halves and blankets rather than inside bags. They could adjust instantly if conditions changed or alarms were sounded. Why vapor management mattered more than warmth. Modern cold casualties still die from moisture, and, you know, WWII soldiers understood this intuitively. Sweat freezes, breath condenses. A sealed sleeping bag traps both. Instead, soldiers slept with open systems that allowed moisture to escape. Boots were loosened or removed, foot wraps were dried against the body, and damp layers were never buried deep. In extreme cold, some units slept with minimal covering on the face to prevent frost build-up from breath. This wasn't comfort. It was survival science learned the hard way. How shared shelter replaced individual sleep systems. Another forgotten trick was body heat pooling. Soldiers slept close, sometimes shoulder to shoulder, inside small shelters or snow-walled positions. German, Soviet and Allied troops all practiced this in different forms. Shelter halves were buttoned together low to the ground, reducing airflow. Snow was piled around shelters as insulation not cleared away. The goal was heat retention, not dryness. A single fire was rarely used through the night, as it revealed position and caused temperature swings that honestly just worsened cold injuries. How you can apply this today when modern gear fails. If you're a survivalist, this knowledge matters more than owning expensive equipment. You should really start by prioritizing ground insulation before anything else. If your sleeping pad fails, use backpacks, spare clothes, branches or debris. Loosen clothing before rest and never sleep in damp layers. Dry socks against your core before sleeping. Right, so use your outer layer as a blanket rather than compressing insulation. Build shelters low and tight, not tall and spacious. If you're in a group, share heat intelligently and reduce exposed surface area. Why this World War II system still outperforms modern assumptions. Sleeping bags are passive tools. World War II cold survival was active skill. Soldiers adjusted constantly, managed moisture, and treated sleep as a controlled process rather than a comfort break. That mindset is why many survived winters that would cripple modern troops without logistic support. This knowledge wasn't written for manuals. It was learned in forests, ruins and frozen fields by men who had no margin for error. This is the kind of legacy survival knowledge that deserves preservation. If this deep dive gave you something new, subscribe to the channel, share it with fellow historians and survivalists, and keep these lessons alive. Winter still hasn't changed, and the cold is still undefeated by ignorance. Legacy of survival.